I guess we should start, right?
Yeah,
Thanks for coming to the podcast, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Take our bar conversations to the mic.
Yeah, I think, and I guess let's start with discussing how we get to know each other by discussing Russian literature.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Because for me, Russian, it's very impressive that you read a lot of Russian literature, especially Dostoyevsky, which has a special place in my heart, so to speak. And for me, it's interesting if once you read, for example, Dostoevsky is it's Russian classics, and a lot of people say that he has he embodies something, or he in his writing, so to speak,
the Russian spirit.
Yeah, and I think it's to an extent it's really true, because certain things about Russian society that didn't even change that much that he depicts in his writings. And I'm curious what you have to say in the sense, how do you see Russia through writings of Russian writers that you read?
I mean, I think it's a very direct confrontation with the suffering of life, a very open acknowledgement of it in his works. But I think through that, though, at least my interpretation, there's a large amount of understanding for the awful things that someone may do in that situation because of their environment. So, let's go to Crime and Punishment. Spoiler alert, I guess it's whatever. Raskolnikov, who commits an awful crime, but he contextualizes it for you. He doesn't justify it. He still condemns it.
Yeah.
But he pushes you to critically think so much as to why this happened.
Yeah.
And I found that to be, I don't know, very, very revealing. He makes Raskolnikov a very admirable character. Explicitly states that he's intelligent, good looking, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And, you see the noble intentions as to why he commits such an act.
Yeah.
But still condemns it. And then, there's I think a bigger political context to it as well. You talk about the extraordinary man who can transcend moral boundaries if it's for the greater good. So, that's kind of a utilitarian idea. Almost. Yeah. And I feel some of those ideas influenced the Russian Revolution that was upcoming as well. To an extent.
Or at least he depicted some the beginnings of what would follow, during Russian, not one, two revolutions, basically, not even two, even more revolutions that followed. But for me, it's also interesting how do you perceive this nation and this spirit that for example, Dostoevsky embodies, or other authors, they try to. Because they always try to say, obviously they try to say there's something unique. Especially Dostoevsky, because he played a lot with this idea of Russian spirit. He was very, I would say, cognizant of this idea that, Russia is kind of, it is a European country, but it has this unique characteristic. And he tried to, I guess, portray it in his own writings. And just for me, it's always interesting, because you've never visited Russia, right?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. No.
I bet you really would like to go there.
Yeah, one day I'd like to see Moscow before I die, but that's indefinitely postponed.
Yeah,
I ain't a fool. I ain't going there right now. But no, it's certainly interesting, and I think also the way he's able to articulate the irrationality of human nature at large. Because, I know you're asking me about the Russian spirit in general, how does it make me perceive Russia specifically? Yeah. But I find something very universal in his work. I forget the whole quote, but from Notes of Underground, how he says, he basically says a man will do something against his own interest just to prove to himself that he's not a piano key.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe some people, people listen to this aren't going to like it, but, I think about COVID, people who did not take the vaccine, and I kind of feel there wasn't really no rational basis for that.
Yeah.
And yet, I think it was kind of just a way of them asserting their own, I don't know, their agency.
Yeah, it's just to show that they have some...
Yeah, because, we don't want to get too sidetracked, but, of course, some people had concerns about, the side effects that it could give you, the vaccine. For some people, it's very valid. But, sometimes people would say that, and I'm wondering, okay, you want to run with the side effects of that, or the side effects of what COVID could do?
Yeah.
Instead, again, this irrational...
element.
Yeah. So he takes that very head on and articulates in a way that I had never seen before leading up to when I first read it, which was Crime and Punishment, actually.
Yeah.
And then I was hooked, basically from there on out.
but he's just a good author. Like,
absolutely.
I guess what people, I mean, a lot of people now, obviously Dostoevsky is a very important like persona in modern literature and philosophy, and people tend to think that he's just like this like very smart type of philosopher, type of dude, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, first of all, he's just a brilliant writer.
Absolutely.
I mean, of course, something like probably lost in translation, but like you can say, like in Russian, when you read him, like the way he depicts, like, like minute details of the scene, it's just like they're so perfect. And like how he depicts like intentions and like how people always do stuff, but they're always kind of, they don't know what exactly they want to do, or it's how like just like small gestures they can express certain feelings or emotions, which is brilliant. Like and you see it like in people after you read him.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think about actually I'm getting the author mixed up, but Tolstoy I think has some of the same talents.
Yeah.
Or Anna Karenina, and I actually forget the name of this major character, but basically describing how he has a certain set of political beliefs simply because they align with what he would like to do in his day-to-day life.
Yeah.
It fits a certain lifestyle that he just wants to live on just a solely individual level, like from a selfish point of view. But he rationalizes them to himself as if they're for the greater good.
Yeah.
And I just, again, like you said, you see it in people all the time after you read.
Yeah. And I think, they certainly, I mean, Dostoevsky especially was like I guess they call him like the first psychoanalyst of like 19th century. And the way he depicts like the inner dialogues and inner thinking. Like to me, I mean, I read like all Dostoevsky. So, I mean, I read like all his books when I was very, very young. And it was hell of impressive. Like, how you can just go into the inner world and just create like those type of like stories from just basically people based on people's like perceptions and emotions, and then create those beautiful narratives. Really? So I mean, he's a brilliant writer. I mean,
and this is something I've seen other people mention before, but I'll just say it again: the way that he'll create characters who represent ideas that he strongly disagrees with, but he makes their arguments so strong in themselves. Yeah. Which forces you to critically analyze and doubt them, and you kind of come out with an even stronger belief in terms of what Dostoevsky wants you to think in certain situations. But
he was also very religious. I guess
the Christian nationalism is definitely in the writing.
You can see. I mean, all his stories, they have like the Bible narrative, so to speak. Mm-hmm. One has to just be very like if you know the Bible, you probably can connect the dots, so to speak. But I mean. What do you think about the idea? Because I mean, I've heard a couple of times that people want to kind of prohibit Russian culture, like including like Dostoevsky, for example. Do you have any thoughts on this? Because sometimes people. I mean, I've been asked a couple of times whether it's a kind of good idea to, because Russian culture embodies like imperialism and stuff like this.
But I mean, I disagree with the idea that it inherently embodies imperialism. I think there's geographic reasons for that as well. If Peter the Great had not been able to go all the way out to the east to the Pacific, would they have still had those imperial intentions? I mean, that's counterfactual, but I don't think there's anything inherent in the Russian culture that's imperial or negative. It's simply a culture. So I guess your question is, how do I feel? You're speaking the context of in the West, like not teaching. I completely disagree with that. Full face. Of course, if it's some sort of like far right ideology or far left in a way that's going to cause unnecessary violence or harm to people masquerading behind something that pretends to represent the Russian culture. Of course, I disagree with that. But I mean, talking about Dostoevsky, or whatever. I mean, that's art. Especially if we're talking about this, it's literature, it's art. So even with the flaws that's in it, like, because Dostoevsky, I mean, you can see the anti-Semitism in his work as well. So I don't think when it comes to the main morals of his works, the point, I would not say it's censored. I mean, of course not. I'm not an anti-Semite. But I mean, in certain ways, he refers to Jewish characters within his books. I mean, you see it there. And, it should be acknowledged. You're not going to paper over that. But you also take in the context of, of that time. Russia has a lot of anti-Semitism, I think, to this day. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a problem globally, but I definitely would not.
But do you think just like reading Dostoevsky now, it gives you certain perspective on even on Russia of today?
It's hard for me to answer that because I ain't seen Russia myself.
Yeah.
Like we just been over. I've never been there. I think you're actually the first like Russian person I've had extended conversations with on a consistent basis. Yeah. I don't think you're the first Russian I've spoke to.
Okay.
But, you know, especially when we talking about getting into politics and culture and all that. So to be honest, I simply don't feel informed enough to say, you know. Yeah. Of course, you know, I think about what's going on now with the war, but at least at this moment, I don't see any direct connection. I mean, I guess maybe I would go for like the psychological perspective, but it's just.
But I think you can actually. I mean, I would maybe give a tip if you think through suffering, which I mean, obviously, it's embodied both in Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I mean, it's embodied in like whole corpus of like Russian literature of 19th century. But I feel it's the same suffering right now. It's like it's always like Russian people. They always live through this like. What I call it's like idea that things can be better, like could potentially be better, but you understand, like, you know, they cannot. I mean, they wouldn't improve, so to speak. It's like this like distorted reality when you.
So it's cognitive dissonance. It almost sounds like what you're describing. Two ideas believing two contradictory ideas at once.
Yeah, because you can see it like in day-to-day conversations. Because like when you talk to people in Russia, you hardly find anyone, even people who like, you know, publicly like support Putin. You see like in private conversations how they, you know, they understand the absurdity of the whole situation. They understand like, you know, like how bad things look like, but yet they kind of like there's nothing for them to do, so to speak. You know, so it's like there's a lot of suffering because you have to always compromise, you know, with reality. And I've seen it like on so many personal occasions when people just, you know, they just go and live their life. They just cannot really make the moral choice. I mean, they understand that there is a moral choice to be made, maybe, but there is just life that you need to live, you know, so to speak. And there is like this, and it just, and you can see it only amplifies the suffering, you know, of the people. So I guess that's like if you read Dostoevsky, you can definitely see, because like they're always like, you know, even in Dostoevsky, what impresses me the most, people are so conscious about that things can get so much better in Russia. Like, you know, they always discuss democracy in Europe.
Yeah, there was the reforms in the Western Europe. It's like, oh, should we copy them? Because I feel like, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, a lot of Russian aristocrats spoke French at this time. There was definitely an affinity for Europe, however you want to neatly define that. But then as certain, you know, reforms took place towards the end of the, you know, 1800s, it's like, okay, which way are we going to go? Are we going to go our own path? And obviously they went. Well, I mean, actually, communism is a very European idea.
Yeah, it's
so. But yeah, I mean, that's insightful when you told me that. Yeah, of course, I didn't see that myself, but. Yeah, I don't know. It's a whole lot to chew with. It's a whole lot to chew with Dostoevsky. I feel like a lot of what I got from him actually was very psychological. Yeah, and I guess universal in terms of people around me, but also within myself. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but you know, I guess as I gain more knowledge about Russia, maybe I'll see more trends as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just from also my personal observations that you see now. I mean, it's just such a big part of Russian society. And then, of course, it creates all sorts of like almost master narratives that, you know, eventually Russian people, they embody suffering and they even love to suffer to a certain extent. I mean, it's as paradoxical as it sounds. They kind of like embrace the suffering. It's got a little bit of a stoic narrative, like, you know, it creates all those type of like narratives. Like people really like just regular people, they really kind of believe in those narratives. Or they kind of like when they operate, that's how they explain their own thinking. It's like they just explain, you know, I mean, we all understand that, like, you know, Putin is just like, you know, he's just like a badass, he's just like a monarch now, but like we, you know, like we're just peasants here, like, you know,
what can we do,
like, this is like the narrative that is really, I mean, it's really prominent.
This idea that, I mean, it's just completely out of their hands. I find that hard to grasp coming from my perspective, but I mean, it definitely, I mean, it's clearly evident, and this is something I've mentioned to you before, but I'll say it again, is I do feel like part of the reason maybe not as many Russians are saying something that do have negative feelings towards this war and Putin at large, to really speak up and say something would be an acknowledgement that this mentality that they've taken through a lot of their lives has ended in disaster. In terms of, what it's led to, the war, and the negative effects for Russia itself as well, young men dying for what?
Yeah. But I guess that's just this kind of disconnect that, like, for me, of course, it's interesting because in comparison to the US, Russian authorities, they were never accountable. It's like they kind of exist, like, because obviously, like, there was like a Tsarist Russia, there was like a communist Russia, and then was like a modern Russia, which played around like with ideas of democracy in the 90s, and it kind of failed. Like, there were like a lot of undemocratic things happening already in the 90s. But like eventually it came down to like, a strong leader in necessity. And there's no kind of mechanism for Russian people to kind of like control those people, because it's just kind of...
Yeah, from an institutional perspective.
Yeah, and you can also see it like, it's so symbolic how Russian elites leave, for example. They live in those like near Moscow. It's like we have like kind of...
The dachas?
Yeah, and it's like a super secretive, like, super secluded areas with like fences that are literally 5 meters tall. Like, imagine seeing a fence that you cannot. It's not that you don't see the like house. You don't even see like what's there. It's literally a fence, like, like almost like a house. And this is like and for me it's also interesting because I try to think a lot through this perspective of kind of physical embodiment of power. And how it like shows you a lot, because it shows you that there's such a disconnect from top, like from like a small bureaucrats to big bureaucrats. That's how they kind of operate. But that's how they came to. It's how things happen, so to speak.
Yeah.
But obviously there's as we discussed many times, there's like this always a conjuncture that Russia tries to create its path, and then kind of like chooses like this unique
path. But what I do want to ask you while you're bringing that up is, the 90s and the paths that could have been taken, what was taken, in terms of the shock therapy that Russia went through in the 90s. Do you feel like, the transition to capitalism was for the best, but it was done into harsh and rash a manner? Yeah. Do you think that was the only option given to y'all? Because it seems pretty objective that the 90s was not a good time for Russia.
Oh yeah, it was like probably the worst time.
Yeah. Like I don't know how true this is, but I've seen some statistics that for Russia individually, like what they went through in the 90s was akin to what some parts of the world went through in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but it seems real bad. Yeah.
Even from personal personal experience, like things were like super bad. It's like people literally didn't have like capacity to earn money because there was like nothing, like there were no jobs, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
and all the assets were kind of sold in these backroom deals, these big companies, that weren't available to the average person.
Yeah, there were like food shortages. There was mafia. There was like all sorts of like stuff happening at the same time. So it was in a like just the whole situation is a complete disaster, so to speak, right? And it's a very obviously very interesting now period of time in Russian history. I think things could have been established it could have been done better, but it's also like hard for me to say. I didn't live through the 90s. I was born in the 90s, but I didn't.
You were conscious at the time.
Yeah, so for me it's just.
I just also think it's interesting to bring up because I do think maybe that time is part of the reason why some people have such a strong affinity for Putin. They see him as a bringer of stability.
Yeah.
Now, maybe not so much the case since the war.
Yeah.
But I guess this kind of leads to, what you sent me, your paper, on how NATO itself played a role in leading to this war and Russia's attitudes towards NATO. Of course, NATO's internal logics itself. But I did want to ask you, what value do you place on other international institutions in terms of, motives for Russia starting the war? For example, like the EU. Because something I thought while I was reading it was, Russia invades Crimea after Ukraine signs the association agreement with the EU in 2014, and from your paper again, it centers NATO as being a center reasoning as to why this war took place. Not saying that Russia had no responsibility, but that's what the argument was over. But I also think there was a 6-year gap between the Munich conference and this invasion in 2014. I believe it was the Bucharest.
Oh, I mean, the speech was in Munich, yeah. It was in Munich.
But I'm thinking about in 2008 when the U.S. basically said Ukraine will join NATO, but on a ambiguous timeline.
Yeah, just like without time frame,
Exactly.
Just like they just stated that Ukraine would join NATO.
And so what I'm getting to is, what explanation do you see for that 6-year gap between 2008 and 2014?
I think it's in. I mean, I also I now can do research on the periods from 2000 to 2008, so to speak, which is also a very interesting period. And I think the explanation is that they just waited for something to happen. For example, even in 2008, you remember, I discussed in my paper this treaty that they sent to Washington and Brussels. They sent not exactly the same treaty, but they created, when Medvedev came to power, they sent a treaty on European security. It was a charter on European security, which is kind of the same thing that they did in 2021, which is they just proposed the same kind of thing, basically no expansion of NATO, the security for the whole continent, including Russia and stuff like this. I think that they really waited a long time, which I know it sounds like, when you do empirical research and you come to these conclusions, and those conclusions align with what kind of Russian propaganda has to say about it, you always feel awkward.
Because Putin's been very clear. He really makes this a lot about NATO. NATO and then the Ukrainian Nazis.
But I guess this is Ukrainian Nazis is obviously something that they needed to create for internal audience.
Yeah, because they want to compare it to the Great Patriotic War, World War II.
Yeah,
they're really trying hard to create that parallel in the Russian psyche of the people in order to justify it. Hey, the Germans are sending weapons to kill us again. That's very, very clear. But NATO's been a big piece of Russian propaganda.
Yeah, but I think there is something to this thinking that is this strategic and you can say military security perspective that they did pursue for from 2000 to 2000, I would say 3. They basically pursued European integration, an awesome Euro-Atlantic integration. Russia itself pursued it, and you could see it through speeches of Putin. Ukraine now says, in my paper, that it's the path to NATO is irreversible. It's the same thing Russia said to America. It's for 3 years, but then they kind of dropped it because of Iraq war and stuff like this, which is to me interesting because I think it's the whole kind of puzzle. As I look at it, it's because the US never actually thought okay, what's the role of Russia in this whole kind of European security thing? Because US did have all the power in the world to do whatever they wanted. So and I guess what Russia wanted from them is just to create this kind of super ally, this a special type of almost not an American representative, but maybe something to play on the Russian, to play with the Russian psyche, because Russian people, they always kind of try to pursue. They have this pursuit of greatness, and I guess they just waited and just kind of they wanted to see what would happen, so to speak.
It was definitely a moment of instability and weakness on Ukraine's part. I mean, you literally have a revolution in the country. The president flees the country. New elections take place. The new person takes power in the context of widespread protests. Yeah. So from that perspective, it makes a certain amount of sense. I guess maybe that was the moment they were waiting for. But I do wonder, because where I was kind of going with it as well is, with the association agreement with the EU, which in comparison to Russia is a more democratic institution. The EU's dirty laundry we could air out in a whole other conversation, but I don't want to get too sidetracked. Yeah. But what I'm getting is I wonder, how threatened did he feel by the concept of a Slavic democracy on his border? Yeah. Because that's automatically incongruous with what he's doing. Yeah. And I guess you could say he doesn't necessarily have to feel threatened, but, again, a Slavic country as well with a lot of common cultural traits with Russia. At least that's my understanding. I don't know how true that is, the Russian-Ukrainian, but I'm just saying in terms of familiarity. I'm not an expert on the subject. I'm just saying my uninformed opinion. But I do wonder how much of that played into it.
I think it's... it's like Ukraine is definitely part of Russian psyche and has always been...
like that's still ours? You said that mentality is still prevalent?
I think that's this
paternal mentality. Yeah. We know what's best for them, or don't rock the boat too much.
Yeah, there's definitely...
At least at the higher levels of leadership.
Yeah, it's also, I guess it's like, because of, it's like you either want to think about it, I guess, like in very abstract terms, and meaning that you want to think about this issue. I would really try to separate this issue into kind of certain levels, because you can think, of course, abstractly through perspective of like security issues, just pure geopolitics maybe. Or you can think about the perspective of mass psyche, like how people perceive Ukraine and Russia. Yeah, they perceive it's like it's not a real country. That's not a
common belief. So Putin was striking a tone that was resonated with people what he really describes is that a lot of Ukrainians, of course, is propaganda. I'm not condoning this viewpoint, but this idea that Ukrainians are suffering from false consciousness. That they're really Russians and they don't realize it. And so that, is something that I don't think can be understated in terms of explanations for the war. And then also, going back to 2004, I believe, when Yushchenko, who was the more pro-EU, pro-West candidate, was poisoned at a dinner.
Oh, yeah.
And, one of those guys fled to Russia, and then he actually came back to Ukraine in 2012, I believe. He wasn't immediately exiled by Russia, but there's been a track record, I think, of interference, clearly, in Ukrainian affairs leading up to this war. And just the way they went about it with Ukraine, it is very imperial, thuggish, gangsterish. A lot of which, you see how the U.S. has treated the Caribbean, Latin America.
Yeah. But, it's still kind of in a different... They do it differently, so to speak, right? From, like, this moral standpoint, sometimes... nowadays, right? Nowadays, when they went to Iraq or Libya, that's for to protect democracy. Yeah. But sometimes you just wonder whether you really. Sometimes I just don't. Also, when you follow people in White House, they can't believe in what they're doing. The other question is how does it come into reality that their again actions contradict their own thinking, and they consistently do it? Because at certain point, because Russians think that Americans are just very American leadership, right? Not American people, but American leadership is just very cynical. So whatever they're doing, they're not really doing for the sake of democratizing the world, or just for their own.
They're always looking for the motivation behind the pretext.
Yeah. Well, he's just saying it's they're cynical. Whatever they're doing is kind of they're doing what the US blames Russia for, kind of thinking. And I doubt that that's the case. I doubt that the US is just very cynical nation, just doing, because also knowing a lot about American history and the whole, just the creation of the US. It's just since the beginning, it was nation completely kind of based on this ideology, and it's very prominent. And most people who who work in, like, especially in the U.S. government, I think they believe in this idea. I mean, and believe what they're doing. You know what I mean? At least for me, how it seems from the outside. Maybe you can help me here in the sense of how do you think about people in the White House? I don't know.
I mean, how I think about the people in the White House.
No, it's
that's
like
Pandora's box.
No, for me it's interesting because when I, like, for example, for me when I think about Putin, I definitely think that, you know, he came to power, and you can find those videos online when he talks about, like, the necessity of democracy. You know, they ask him about, like, and he is like a famous video when they ask him something about democracy, and he says, like, yeah, it's like if one person stays in power, it corrupts you, you know, it like, and it's like a detriment to democracy. And he says it, like, I mean, again, it's like also like it just gives you the perspective that of course he was self-aware of those things, right? And he gives interviews like discussing this openly. And then, like, you know, like you know, years pass by, and like you can see him, like, you know, coming to Kremlin, and like, you know, and Kremlin is it's like, I mean, if you see the pictures, like, you cannot really. I mean, it's like certain things you cannot really see on the picture, right? When you see like the physical Kremlin, and it looks like this, I mean, grand European palace. It has like, yeah, it does have like those kind of like influence from the Middle East, so to speak, right? The whole, like, the architecture, and like, you know, imagine him going through those kind of rooms like day after day. And then just starting to, like, he started, I mean, I definitely think like those ideas creeped into him. The ideas of the greatness of Russia, you know, of Russian sovereignty. Because like
a special mission.
Yeah, I don't think you can go through those palaces and not get, like, you know, infected by this idea that Russia is like a superpower.
Yeah. Well, in general, I believe absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like I said, in a general way. I think, could I give you the exact number? No, not for sure. I don't know, maybe a decade plus. But I mean, I think, you know, if you have power over a certain period of time, it will change you. And I think a lot of times for the worst. Yeah. It gives you hubris. I mean, I cannot definitively prove that, you know, but it's a personal belief that I have. But going to, you know, going back to American leadership, I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying in terms of how, you know, you can have a certain belief, even put it in rhetoric, and then do things that are contradictory while still genuinely believing in the rhetoric that you put out. I mean, again, we don't want to get too off topic from the war in Ukraine, but, you know, thinking about what's happening in Israel and Palestine, you know, you have, you know, the U.S. trying to broker a ceasefire, pressuring Israel. We're trying to build a port to get access to aid into Palestine because Israel's not letting in any significant amount of aid. But meanwhile, we are giving the arms to Israel that makes it possible for these war crimes and crimes against humanity to take place. So I'm just saying, I agree with you when you talk about the contradictions that leadership can have while genuinely believing what they say. But I think, you know, when it comes to the American leadership, I think there is a lot of lack of self-confidence, a lot of doubt in the moment. I think in the context of a failed war on terror, in some ways, I think it succeeded in that we don't have, you know, a lot of Islamic, specifically terrorist attacks in the U.S. anymore. Specifically from the groups that we were going after at the beginning, Al-Qaeda. But, you know, obviously, complete failure in Afghanistan. The Taliban came back. You know, nothing. And then Iraq, we created a failed state, pretty much. I mean, Saddam, no fan at all, awful human being in person. But it really seems, by all accounts, the country's worse off than before our invasion. And what I'm getting at is, I think for a lot of people, instead of sitting down and reflecting, okay, how did we make such enormous efforts? Like doing a real deep self-critical analysis. I think a lot of us simply just picked up our ball and said, I'm going home now. I don't want to play no more. I don't want to play no more. And I think that's part of the psychology that you see in some of this Republican leadership, these people who are, you know, trying to stop Ukraine and saying it has nothing to do with us. I do think Biden, on a personal level, and you mentioned this in the paper, is strongly and confidently in support of Ukraine. But what I will say, again, sticking to the topic, because we could go a million different ways with this, but I don't I don't really know if we really have a long-term vision for that region.
Yeah.
For whatever you want to call it, the post-Soviet space, for Russia's place in Europe. I do think a lot of it seems pretty reactive. You know, simply, okay, Russia is invading Ukraine, violating territorial sovereignty. We want to stop this. I'm doing everything I can to decisively stop this. I'm talking about Biden, Blinken. Of course, there's a whole lot of domestic political considerations, but oversimplification. But as to like what happens, you know, like let's say, you know, Putin calls off the war tomorrow, which of course is not going to happen. But hypothetically, I don't see a clear vision. I don't see a clear vision. I think that's a major problem. Yeah. And I don't really know if Europe does either. Western Europe, whether it be Germany, France, the UK, in terms of, you know, how to treat, you know, these states, and, you know, whether it be Baltic Europe or Black Sea Europe
or Russia.
Or Russia. I don't. It's very lazy thinking. I don't know, because it seems like the predominant belief, I think especially here in Germany, was this idea that, you know, through trade and this and that the country Russia would slowly liberalize. You know, Putin won't be here forever, and, you know, as they get wealthier, you know, they'll come around and slowly be like, oh, because of course they all knew what they were dealing with. You know, a dude who worked kind of in a mafia style, the assassinations in UK.
But they also, like, you know, Germans like did trade with Russia, but only like a specifically focusing on, like, you know, gas and resources, which is, like, you know, basically putting money into like
the war machine.
Like not war, but basically what became a war machine.
What became the war machine. Well, again, I think that was the short-sightedness of it thinking, because a lot of countries, you know, further east were warning them. Poland, the Baltics, you know, so but going back to American leadership, I definitely think there's a lack of vision, and you know, I don't know what the solution is, because I'll be real, I don't have the solution. I don't know what the vision is in terms of how to integrate Russia, because I think, again, I brought that up because I do think the U.S. and Western Europe needs to think that through more thoroughly. But at the same time, I think, you know, Russians have the right to choose that for themselves, and that is also their burden, or responsibility, depending on how you look at it. Yeah. And I'll be real with you, you know, as an outside observer, and again, I don't really know there's much to argue about it, but like, y'all have failed at the moment. In doing that. Yeah. You know, your place, because this is where we at right now, and with a war that benefits nobody. Yeah. Don't benefit Russia either. Yeah. Even if you know, he were to steamroll over Ukraine tomorrow and Zelensky were to capitulate. Yeah. The native population hates you. Yeah. Most of it, at the very least. Your economy is like on a complete war footing now. Yeah. All these dead men, all these traumatized men who are going to come back. Yeah. So, but I think that's a very pressing question. You know, what is the vision for Russia? And like I've asked you before, it's like, what you want to be? You just want to be like the West? Yeah. You just want to be like the West? What does that mean? And do you really want that in the context of
the things that have
this democratic decline that's happening throughout the West? The neoliberal hegemony that we live through. Of course, you know, you could simply say, I like this. This is great. But I strongly disagree with you then. Yeah.
But it's also, for me, it's interesting how it's almost, I mean, it has like this, you know, the whole idea that Russia is against the West. It also has like certain narratives that you take from the past, because I mean, Russia conceives of itself as a part of Europe. I mean, still, and you can see it like in all speeches on, like, you know, whether it's Putin or Minister of Foreign Affairs or whatever, and they never think about themselves as like outside Europe. So they always like think about themselves as like, it's almost like it's like they're better part of the West. You know what I mean? That's what kind of like their actual vision.
Well, I do agree in terms of how they view themselves. It's like we're the West before y'all lost your way.
Yeah, because before, like, you went to decline, so to speak.
Yeah, and now, because you know what Putin be talking about, the genderless West. Yes. This gay propaganda. Oh, we gonna shut that down. You know, we're, and that's why, you know, I see in the U.S. in the context of the culture wars, you have people further to the right who are idolizing Russia pretty openly. You know, Tucker Carlson heading over there. Oh yeah, you know, like, oh my God, look at these shopping carts. You know, this and that, not challenging Putin on any of his falsehoods. So definitely, I agree with that. But on that topic, I do want to ask you. I mean, do you not see Russia as Eurasian at all? Yeah, because a lot of it is in Asia.
I think Russian state,
the density is much more in the European population. Yeah. But I mean, because that's something I think about too. It's a lot of ethnicities there that are not European, and you never really see them get talked about too much besides the Chechens. Or I don't know. I'm showing my ignorance right now. They're not European. Being in the Caucasus,
Caucasian.
Being in the Caucasus, But I don't really see other ethnicities being represented at the highest levels of the Russian government.
I mean, it's still ethnically. It's like, I mean, I don't want to mass statistics, but it's probably like 80% of population is like ethnically Russian. Which even if you compare it to France nowadays, it's like statistically speaking, Russian population is way much more like ethnically like united, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it has to do more with this idea of it's still like remnants of Russian Empire. Whether it's like it was Soviet Union, now it's like type of new. I mean, you can say it's like new Russian Empire or new Soviet Union.
Yeah, he's definitely got imperial ambitions. He compared himself to Peter the Great.
Yeah, and they also play a lot with this idea of trying to be multicultural, because like Russia never. I mean, it never just. There was no period when Russia just ended being empire and just became a nation state, because Russia. If you think about it, I mean, it's probably like 80. Okay, like let's even say 80% of people are ethnically Russian, right? It should be more or less just a nation state. You know what I mean? Nation state as France is a nation state, or
But then the next question is, who's part of the nation?
Yeah, and this is of course.
Difficult. Are you going to have an inclusive mentality or an exclusive mentality? I mean, because I think it's pretty apparent there's a lot of discrimination in Russia. That's why I look at their reaction to there was that terrorist attack just the other month at the concert. And I think they were all from Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, I mean,
and now there's been a massive crackdown. It appears like on people from Kyrgyzstan at large, and there's a lot of temporary workers there. And it seems like there's kind of this blatant mentality of. But
I guess this tension. I mean, this tension has always been there, between people from, especially Central Asia, coming to Russia. I mean, they're coming as migrants, right? Yeah. I mean, very often illegal migrants, so they don't have like in Germany, because you can just cross the border easily. And I mean, it's obviously a problem, but again, it just I mean. What I try to think about is how Russian state utilizes this idea, so to speak, of Russia, as ethno-cultural, nation, for its own kind of purposes, so to speak. Because again, they don't really think about people living in Russia. I mean, no one in Kremlin thinks about people living in Russia.
The actual day-to-day quality of their life.
Yeah,
I mean that's what their actions show, so it makes sense.
I mean, I remember when I went to university in Russia, one of our professors, she argued openly that Russia cannot be democratic until it's separated into a couple of states, which is interesting.
In order to retain all that territory, it needs to have this strong centralized power that doesn't have much democratic.
And I guess to be more monolithic and more centered around certain regions, because again, it's just all about being able to control your own people who you elect, so to speak. I mean, and Russia, of course, it's interesting because Russia based Russian constitution on American constitution. It's like a copy paste, it's like all those things, but very very copy paste.
I know that.
The funniest thing that when Putin became president in 2000, they had this rule in the US. You cannot be elected as you can be elected as a president only twice.
Yeah, and that's why you put Medvedev in.
Yeah, but they didn't have on twice, just twice. Let's try twice in a row.
So he took a little break. He put his boy in, and then he doubled back.
Which is still I mean,
he don't even pretend no more though.
I mean, I have my own thoughts about the whole Medvedev thing. It was like
Medvedev. He was a Democrat at the time. That's how he was.
He was like very openly Democrat, like
But then look at him now. I wonder how much of it was an act though, because we're talking about a massive shift now. Because he be saying the wildest things sometimes, and then I feel
you never know. Like maybe they hold his kids in the basement. Like FSB,
because that man and the Democrat, it don't line up. Because I feel like his role now is almost to say wild things,
but
then it makes Putin look more moderate when Putin pulls back the leash.
Yeah, but he's not like he's one of those friends of Putin who was just like he was just a lawyer, like
he doesn't. It's not about a meritocracy.
Yeah, he's not from FSB or anything. So probably they all like eventually came from had some connection to FSB, but like he's not like officially like that type of the person like from Siloviki class,
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to like this 2007, because they were like Medvedev, and I don't remember the name of the guy, but there was like another person who like everyone thought he gonna choose him, and there was like a typical Silovik, kind of like a Putin person. Mm-hmm. He chose Medvedev, so maybe there was like a lot of signaling to the West again. Because look, you wanted like change of government. Here's your change of government,
Yeah. And I'd like to look into how the West reacted to that at the time, because I'll be real, I don't know.
Yeah,
in terms of how much did the West buy that.
I mean, they always I remember they had like those parodies that it's not real. Of course, it's like they had but like eventually, but you also it's hard to envision like the change of government in Russia any other way, because even if it happens, it still happens like through this like elitist, kind of like change of elites, so to speak. Like it's like a change in elites within elites, but it can't be really democratic process in a country that doesn't have any real democratic institutions. Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't have any party system. Like, it doesn't have any good parties. Like, even if you want to vote, I mean, and if you want real democracy, it's like there's also like a lot of voices in Russia. If you want real democracy in Russia, I mean, good luck with that. They're probably going to choose like kind of new Adolf Hitler, like, kind of like Prigozhin. That's like their candidate.
Yeah, he probably would have gotten a lot of votes if he was allowed to run.
Yeah.
Prigozhin. Oh my god.
And I mean, I actually think if Prigozhin, he's obviously dead now, but like if he were to run, yeah. But if he were to run, like he would have a good nationalist base, because I mean that's type of if you like if you work. If you understand Russian psyche, you need to be like very kind of like this type of nationalist, almost like there is a lot of like, I mean, people used to say it a lot before the war in Ukraine, that Putin is embodiment of like a lighter version of that.
Mm-hmm. But that's how he seems to view himself. I am the embodiment of the will of the Russian people.
Yeah, but like not like lighter, like because it can go even darker, so to speak.
Yeah.
But obviously now it changed because of repressions and like all this kind of because they just like so many people just go to jail now for just posting something. Mm-hmm. It obviously sounds something like from that people like that we saw in like 1930s in Soviet Union.
Yeah, and this regression is scary.
Yeah,
but going back to the rationalizations for the war, I do wonder what we can get from how the war itself is being waged in terms of its causes, because the reality is with this war there's genocidal rhetoric behind it, to a certain extent at the very least. We're saying that the Ukrainian people don't really exist as Ukrainians. They don't really exist. And of course in the liberated occupied territories you have a lot of cases of torture, sexual assault, executions of people who are non-combatants. So, with that in mind, I think it kind of goes back to why I do challenge you a bit in terms of centering NATO completely. This genocidal rhetoric, this irrationality.
Yeah.
And the explanation for that, I'm not entirely sure. I'm putting out questions that I don't have the answers to. Yeah. I mean, maybe this links to Putin seeing a special Russian mission. These grandiose ideas, his isolation during COVID.
Yeah.
Because I definitely don't think that can be discounted. Because looking at this war, I don't see something that's entirely based in realist pragmatism.
Yeah.
International theory.
what I think, I mean, always like, in every situation, like multi-cause, like you kind of like when you have just one explanation, it's usually pretty flawed, so to speak. Like you have to look at it from many perspectives. I mean, I think definitely that, I mean, I told you, like, I really believe that Putin got like a Russian virus. He definitely believes in the idea of Russia. Like he, like sometimes when he speaks like as Russia speaks through him. Like you can see it, like, because like I mean, yeah, and some people call him like mad because of that. But it's like maybe there is something to the idea of a nation that is like really real. It's like, we know that viruses are real, kind of like why Russia is a virus cannot be a real thing. And again, like coming back, like when you put into this, like, big palaces, you have so much power, you can go through from Moscow to Vladivostok, and you just like try to like just in your brain just try to understand you rule this like lands, and you can collect those resources for your own, like, do whatever you want with that.
And I do think, taking the context, he's in a KGB man. He said, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. Catastrophe. So I mean, he's pretty open about his thinking in certain ways, but yeah, I don't know. When it comes to this war, it's obviously it's a tragedy. But thinking about how some of these lands will even be reincorporated if they are liberated. Crimea, for example. I mean, will the next government, even if it's more democratic, give it up willingly? Yeah, because well, we haven't really talked about it all at the moment. I guess because it wasn't the focus talking about the causes. If we're getting too off topic, stop me. But the reality is the war right now, Ukraine's on the back foot. Yeah, I don't want to speak beyond my knowledge because I'm not no military expert, nothing like that. Yeah. But just what I've been reading, it seems apparently Ukraine is steadily losing ground. Not at like an extremely fast pace, but they are. Obviously, the summer offensive last year failed. Yeah, but a huge aid package has just been passed by the U.S. So we'll see how that affects the progress. But, I don't know. I mean, maybe I wonder how Russia is reacting to this passing of this new aid package. If it's no effect at all, if it's weakening their resolve. I mean, I guess these are the type of things that they're probably not going to say publicly. You only have to guess at it. But
I think they chose. I think when they announced that they're going to incorporate those territories, I think there was like a deliberate decision to play like a very long game. And I think whatever Putin is playing, he's playing just a long game. It's like everyone, like they all understand like the problem won't be resolved in 1, 2, 3 years. It's probably something that we're going to lead through like 5, 10 years more.
Yeah, assuming the regime stays in power. Yeah. But then going back to their thinking, is why I think it becomes clear that, Putin thinks that the U.S., this democratic decline, which the West is absolutely experiencing, if you don't see it, you're in denial. But I think he thinks that it's inevitable and it's happening at a pretty fast pace. I think he's banking on that, for leaders like Marine Le Pen, Trump, an AfD, an alternative for Deutschland to come into power. These more inward-looking individuals, parties, and they'll let him, do what he wants. Or at least give him a real good deal. I think he's absolutely banking on that, and I can see why he thinks that. I think he's mistaken in thinking that's inevitable, assuming he does think that.
I think it's one part of calculation. But like for me, I guess like when the more I study like the actions of Russian government when Putin came to power, it's clearly that he's the type of person that likes to wait a lot. Like because he can. Like and also it's like in comparison to the West, he has all the power. Like he makes the decisions.
I mean, he done seen Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. So I mean, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, he just waits and he waits for developments, and then he acts. Like and then he when necessary he acts, so to speak. So of course, like I think this conflict is with us for like probably at least 10 more years, if not more, and then it's.
I mean, if it's gonna go 10, I don't know if Ukraine's gonna have enough men at that point. This is the part where I'm kind of speaking out of my lane. Yeah. But just from what little knowledge I do have, now we're trying to guess what's gonna happen with the war. But I definitely agree. He's absolutely seeing a long game. I think whatever breaks that happen in this war, it's just or negotiations. I think it's just a pause until he regains the strength to go further, or if he sees a weakness, a moment of weakness on Ukraine's part. As long as that Zelensky regime is there, a regime that is firmly anti-allying with Russia, he clearly, seems unable to accept that. Yeah. He's shown that time and time again. I don't know if this is 100% proven true, but I feel strongly enough where I'm going to say it on this. I think Russia was behind the poisoning of Yushchenko in 2004. And then the invasion of Crimea. And now the full-scale invasion.
Yeah.
So,
that's
it's a track record. It's a track record. So
and obviously the question is, it's like, because you also need to think, what is his end goal? Like, this is what I try to think a lot. Like, what would be end goal? But like, the more I think about like Putin's end goal, and
I apologize. Let me let you finish.
The more I think about it's basically his open negotiation with the West. Like, negotiation through the means of war nowadays.
War is diplomacy through other means, as the saying goes. Yeah, I think that's very plausible. I think what I would say is I think he really wants to usher in this multipolar era, like, definitively.
Yeah.
I guess you could maybe argue we're already there.
Yeah.
And I think we are to an extent. It's kind of blurry lines where you want to draw it, but I definitely,
of course,
the unipolar moment I do think is over. I think you can see that in the reaction to the war. Like, Africa's not all on the line with the West, sanctions on Russia, this and that. India is continuing to buy, I believe, Russian gas and oil still, or at least the oil, because they're getting it at discount prices. Which is, India had that leeway in 1991.
Yeah.
I doubt it. But going back to what I was going to say, my point is, I think he wants to get into a situation. I really do. If he sees the moment is right, where he gets into a confrontation with NATO with the strong belief that the U.S. will not show up. And then if that happens, U.S. credibility is shattered.
Yeah.
And we are definitively in a multipolar era. Like, at that point, again, you could probably say we already are now, but at that point, it's like Russia's right there with the U.S. in some way. Economically, it still would not even be close, but, that would be a monumental event in the international system. And I think that's the confrontation because this is not just about Ukraine. This is about with the West.
Yeah,
they're open. We are at war with the West. This is what I just saw. They put the vehicles out on display that they captured, some Abrams tanks, some German stuff that they sent over. So I think that's what he's looking for, which is why I do believe so strongly that the U.S. and the rest of Europe should continue supporting Ukraine, because I don't think he's going to stop. I really don't. I think the Baltics are next. I think he's gonna challenge them for real, and of course that's an extremely dangerous situation for a NATO Russia. That could be Armageddon.
Yeah, and for Europe in general, which is like which is a very pessimistic scenario.
But he's been open. I think that is a big part of what he said at the Munich statement and whatever that was. Where it's like, he was basically, the way I'm interpreting, he's basically like, what right does the U.S. have to tell us, everybody else, what to do?
Yeah.
I think he's continued to say that. And I think there are very valid reasons for saying that. But obviously Putin's taken it to a way where he wants the U.S. spot.
Yeah, there's a lot of resentment. That
trauma as well from the collapse of an empire, I think, as well.
Yeah. But also, I guess it's like it's just not like, you can't really explain it through like one perspective, but like there's so many factors. Mistakes of the U.S. foreign policy, like, as well contributed to it. And just like mistakes, and again, because I feel what the U.S. is missing, and for me it's also like very surprising, kind of like surprising to like, just like, I want to understand what is missing in the U.S. like diplomacy or just foreign policy apparatus, that they never really reflect on their own mistakes, and then they keep making the same mistakes, which leads to the situation when they kind of, again, they don't have a grand thinking. They kind of do in like certain way, but this grand thinking just keeps it keeps making the same mistakes that led them to.
Yeah, that everyone thinks like us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that was very, very apparent with, the wars in Iraq.
Yeah.
And Afghanistan, especially Iraq, where, this idea of universal values. Everybody thinks like us.
Yeah.
Everybody's gonna want democracy when we force feed it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, there was still a little bit of that when looking at Russia. And again, I just leave in the context of liberal international theory with the strong belief in international organizations and this idea that there's this path that you go on as you liberalize your economy, that democracy will come with it. With wealth comes democracy, which is clearly, I think, not true.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, so I think that might have played a part. But yeah, I mean, we've discussed, off this pod about, the fact that the U.S. gave a NATO guarantee to Ukraine and Georgia. With no clear timeline. That was the worst of both worlds. Angering Russia, antagonizing Russia while simultaneously not guaranteeing security for either of those countries. And we see that. Georgia got invaded and lost a little bit of land. Ukraine has gotten invaded and lost a good chunk of land. And, may lose some more. Hopefully not.
And they repeated the same in 2021. That's actually one of my paper when I was doing research. I was like, wow, it's like they're just repeating the same mistake here. And and for me it was like, and I understand Biden's administration is probably one of the best administrations that the US, I mean, in terms of foreign policy, with a good
Are you saying in history? You're saying
not
in
the
recent
history,
time?
but in recent history. I mean, it's a solid.
All I see is maybe all I see is oversimplification, but I'm seeing a whole lot of mistakes. I mean, you see the war in Israel and Palestine right now. Continuing to neglect the Palestinians' desire and right to their own country. Yeah, that's being occupied. I think
that's a big
a big mistake. And also, I think there's been a lot of pressure for countries to choose between the U.S. and China.
Yeah.
Hey, don't let Huawei do stuff here, this and that, where countries like, yo, China's a huge economy. Let me get some of this money. But not to get too off topic, but with Biden, and I'm actually someone who believes that Biden is a decent man, despite the fact that his administration, his actions are leading to these a whole series of long U.S. decisions have led to what's happened to Israel. Palestine. You don't want to get too off topic, but it's relevant.
Yeah. He's professional, right?
Yeah, he's professional, but I do think he is a decent man. I don't want to ramble about this, but I don't think he's scum. But what I totally think he lacks is an imagination.
Yeah.
This is a dude who's been in the political system for so damn long. Yeah. And I think he's got a box when it comes to his thinking. Definitely when it comes to sticking to the neoliberal playbook. But, his conception of Russia, there's a short-sightedness to it. And that's where it goes back to a lacking of vision. Yeah. And I guess it wasn't just him. Obama didn't address it. Yeah. Bush didn't address it. Yeah. Clinton didn't really. I think it was just they'll just become like the rest of Europe. I don't know what the assumption was. But Biden, I mean, there are some foreign policy things that are in terms of, for example, his strong, decisive support for Ukraine. But I don't know. I wish I could explain to you why there's this lack of understanding with Russia. But
just missing them. Because I know, and again, for me, it's I don't buy this whole argument that they're just cynical. Just again, just knowing American culture and just American people even, it's again, it's, I just don't feel that this is a good argument just to argue that just Americans are very cynical. I mean, it's also a very monocausal explanation of all their actions. And to me, it's it really seems that it's almost they're missing something in their thinking, and and it's almost this this bothers them too. Come on, because I mean, it's imagine having all the power in the world, being in this moment when America basically, and it still can decide the future of humanity for sure.
It's still the most powerful country in the world.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, and it's also a lot of leverage. And even talking about China, Russia, you never know how those systems, gonna survive. But there is, I mean, I bet the US gonna survive more than Russia as a country. I mean,
okay.
I mean, seriously, because
you said it, not me.
No, but not as a system, so to speak, because I like American system. Like it's one of the most like is I mean it has been with us for 300 years.
It does,
and it's still there.
Yeah.
Like
showing some cracks though.
Yeah,
showing
but like.
Cracks. You want to get me started on that? I'm gonna have to do another one. If you want to get me started on that?
We'll keep it for the next one. When there's going to be closer to election season, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's still what I'm trying to say. It's like for a long-term perspective. I still have more belief in like the continuity of the American system.
Yeah, in contrast to the Russian one.
Yeah, because Chinese one. China is also because the state is a new state. You never know how it's gonna play out, like in the 50 years even. Mm-hmm. But the American system, it seems it was stable through like last 2 centuries and was fine. Mm-hmm. So it has like a mechanism to solve the problems, and it keeps kind of like. Updating itself almost, right? And like Russian system, it does not know how to update itself. It just it just keeps making like the fatal error every time, going to revolution, and then just starting all over again. Mm-hmm. And in the Russian case, that's especially from people's perspective, it's what leads to suffering. Coming back to what we started the podcast. Yeah. Because it's like if you owned anything in 80s or like whatever, even when the time of the Dostoyevsky, it's all gone. You cannot even trace your relatives in Russia. It's so hard. You cannot know who your relatives are because in Soviet Union they just basically erased this memory of people because it was inappropriate to ask where did you come from?
They want everybody to be equal.
Yeah,
but that was the law.
Yeah, which is of course is like an animal farm, right?
Yeah, everyone's equal. Some people are more equal than others. Yeah.
But eventually it led to to this kind of and again, like for example, in American culture, just bring the topic of the American culture once again. It's like you still think so much about the Civil War.
It's still very conscious. I mean, I didn't see many people have American or Confederate flags on the back of their trucks. Yeah. So many times in my life to count. So yeah. It's there. I mean, it's their distortion of history. But yes, it is. It's present. We're taught about it in school. We're also taught a distorted history about it.
Yeah.
Again. Yeah, I don't know because you have a point that I don't want to run off of. But the Civil War is present in our consciousness.
Yeah, it's part of it.
Present. It's there.
But like Russian Civil War, which many more people died in Russian Civil War than in World War I from the Russian side. It's completely gone. We don't discuss it. Just because there's just this kind of missing understanding of we just fought with each other just 100 years ago inside our own country for just
in a brutal war.
In a brutal war with a mass. I mean, basically, what created Stalin's system was a civil war because they started doing repressions, right?
That's where they got their practice.
Yeah, I mean, and then they just carried on, and this is completely missing. So it's there are so many demons in Russian society that it's just I mean, you could see a lot of people arguing that what is going on in Russia, it's already civil war inside Russia because it's very repressed one, and it's I see this argument because there is just no way to express it, but it's definitely there. The animosity towards other people in Russia, it's very high. Okay. And the lack of it's just a lack of community. Just Russian people hate each other most of the time. Yeah.
Oh, that's sad to hear.
Yeah. Coming back to suffering, Okay. I guess we can, finish it for today.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. It's a good convo.
Thanks for coming. Well, we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, see you, man.